All right, so the instructions for this question say to solve by the zero factor property, and basically that is their way of telling you that we want to try to factor this quadratic equation. So if you read the instructions, there's kind of a hint that you should be factoring it, but also when you look at the actual equation, you see that you have a square power. So you do have a quadratic equation. And as a quadratic equation, we have all our different methods. We have our factoring method. We have also the quadratic formula. And if you wanted to, you could go through the quadratic formula for this question and get the same answer as somebody that factored it. But because this question specifically asks to factor, let's go through the method that we would use. So with the factoring method, the first thing that we need to do is we need to move everything over to one side. So that is done for us here. So then the second step, of course, is to factor. Now, with factoring, there's so many different methods. One method that's the tried and true is the AC method, where you look at the factors of the first times the last. So you think about 7 times -3, which gives us -21. So we need two numbers that multiply together to give us -21. And then they need to add up to give us this middle term. So we need the two numbers to add to give us 4. So you work through the combinations. With 21, there's not a whole lot of combinations to try. It is going to have to be 7 and 3 in some form or fashion. To get a +4, we would need a +7 and a -3. And then once we change these signs over here, we just go over to the other side and make sure that changing the signs here will work. And they, of course, do. 7 times -3 gives us our -21. Now, if you just have a 1x squared, then what you can do is you can write x, and you can plop down the numbers. But if it's not 1x squared, then what we have to do is we have to split up the middle term. Okay, so let's go through that just really quickly here to make sure everything's okay with that. So we have 7x squared plus 4x minus 3 is equal to 0. That's what we're trying to solve. We have our winning combination here of 7 and -3. So because this is not just a 1x squared, I'm going to split up the middle as 7x and -3x. And you'll notice that 7x minus 3x gives us the 4x that we need. Then we have -3, and then the 7x squared will still be there. Now, at this point, we have 4 terms, and whenever we have 4 terms, we go through our grouping method. So we look at the first 2 terms, and we say, okay, they have a common 7x, and essentially what's happening is we're dividing this by 7x, and that's going to give us an x, divide this by 7x, and that's going to give us a 1. Remember that if you start with 2 terms, you got to end with 2 terms inside of this parenthesis. All right, now if we get an x plus 1 here, then somehow we have to fabricate a way to get x plus 1 from the other group. And the way that you can do this is you can look at what you have. You currently have a -3x, and you want to get an x. And if you think about what you have divided by what you want, that will tell you what you need to factor out. So when I reduce the -3x over x, that tells us that I need to bring out a -3. And you can verify that totally works because the -3 times x gives us the -3x, the -3 times 1 gives us the -3 is equal to 0. All right, so then at this point, with our grouping method, we now have an x plus 1 common to both. So we bring out the x plus 1, and then we're left over with the 7x from the first group and the -3 from the second group. And now we have our factorization. So again, you don't necessarily have to go through this method, but somehow you got to get it factored. Once it is factored, then the zero factor property says that we can set the x plus 1 equal to 0 and the 7x minus 3 equal to 0. So we solve, we get x is equal to -1. Over here, we would add 3 to both sides, get 7x is equal to 3, divide by 7, and get x is equal to 3/7. So those are our two answers, -1 and 3/7.